After my son's fraud destroyed my company and reputation, I ended up waitressing. One day, a wealthy businessman joked, "Financial advice, waitress." He didn't know who I used to be. I looked at his papers. "You'll be bankrupt in 6 months." He laughed it off. Next day, 6 a.m. sharp, he was at my door. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me take you back to how this all started. 2 years ago, I was Catherine Wells, senior partner at Wells & Associates Financial Consulting. I had corner offices in downtown Chicago, managed portfolios worth over $50 million, and drove a BMW that cost more than most people's annual salary. My clients included tech entrepreneurs, real estate moguls, and old money families who trusted me with their generational wealth. Then my son Michael decided to play Gordon Gekko with client funds. The FBI raid happened on a Tuesday morning in October. I was reviewing quarterly reports when agents in navy jackets stormed through our mahogany doors like they owned the place, which, legally speaking, they did once they slapped those seizure notices on everything from my coffee mug to my diplomas. Michael had been forging my signature for 8 months, moving money between accounts like he was playing 3-card Monte with people's retirement funds. $2.7 million gone, along with my reputation, my license, and my sanity. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 30 years teaching people how to spot financial red flags, and my own son had been waving them right under my nose. The media had a field day. Financial advisor's son bilks clients in Ponzi scheme. My name was attached to every headline, even though I was victim number 1. The lawsuits came next. Civil suits from clients who lost their savings, criminal proceedings that cleared me legally but destroyed me professionally. Even vindicated, nobody wanted financial advice from the woman whose own family had robbed them blind. By Christmas, I was 68 years old with $47 in my checking account and a studio apartment in a neighborhood where sirens were the dominant musical genre. That's when I saw the help wanted sign at Murphy's Diner. Murphy's Diner wasn't exactly what you'd call fine dining. The coffee tasted like it had been filtered through old gym socks. The vinyl booths had more cracks than a Chicago sidewalk in February, and the fluorescent lights made everyone look like they were suffering from some exotic disease. But it paid cash daily, didn't require references, and the owner, Tommy Murphy, didn't care that I'd been plastered across the financial pages for all the wrong reasons. "You ever waitress before?" Tommy asked during my interview, which consisted of him looking me up and down while wiping his hands on a stained apron. "I've been serving people for 30 years, I said. It wasn't technically a lie. The job was harder than managing million-dollar portfolios, if you can believe that. At least hedge fund managers said please when they were being condescending. The breakfast crowd at Murphy's treated waitresses like walking coffee dispensers with the unfortunate side effect of having opinions. But I adapted. I had to. The tips paid for my insulin, the shifts kept me busy enough to avoid thinking about how spectacularly my life had imploded, and the work was honest in a way that made me feel clean again. 3 months in, I'd developed what Tommy generously called interpersonal skills, and what I called the ability to smile while fantasizing about poisoning someone's coffee. That's when Harrison Blackwell walked into my life. It was a Thursday morning in March. The kind of day when Chicago couldn't decide if it wanted to be winter or spring, so it chose to be miserable instead. The breakfast rush was winding down when he strolled through the door like he owned not just the diner, but the entire city block. Designer suit, Italian leather shoes, and the kind of watch that cost more than I'd made in the past 6 months. He was probably in his mid-50s, with silver-gray hair and the confident bearing of a man who'd never heard the word no applied to anything he wanted. He settled into booth 7, pulled out his phone, and immediately began conducting what sounded like a hostile takeover via speakerphone, because apparently common courtesy was for people who couldn't afford $1,000 suits. "Excuse me," I said, approaching his table with my best customer service smile. "I'm going to need you to lower your voice or take that call outside. Other customers are trying to enjoy their breakfast." Harrison Blackwell looked up at me like I'd suggested he donate a kidney to charity. His pale blue eyes did a quick assessment, categorizing me somewhere between furniture and minor inconvenience. "I'll have coffee, black, and whatever passes for eggs Benedict in this establishment," he said. never actually pausing his phone conversation about crushing some competitor's quarterly projections. I poured his coffee, noting that his papers were spread across the table like he was conducting board meetings at the United Nations. Financial statements, merger documents, acquisition proposals. My trained eye couldn't help but spot familiar warning signs in the scattered documents, old habits dying hard as concrete. 20 minutes later, he was still talking, now discussing some real estate deal in Miami with enough volume to wake the dead. The other customers were shooting dirty looks, and Tommy was giving me the "handle this or you're fired" stare from behind the counter. "Sir," I tried again, "I really need you to—" "Hold on," he said into the phone, then looked at me with the expression of a man addressing a particularly slow child. "Do you understand that this call is worth more than you'll make in your entire lifetime?" The diner went quiet. Even the coffee pot stopped percolating, like it was holding its breath waiting for what came next. I looked down at the papers scattered across his table. Blackwell Enterprises, real estate acquisitions, tech startup investments. And right there, visible in the scattered documents, the kind of leverage patterns and cash flow indicators that had kept me awake at night when I saw them in other portfolios. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying just loud enough for the whole diner to hear, "I understand that you're about to lose everything you think you own." He blinked, clearly not expecting his waitress to have opinions about his business empire. "I beg your pardon? Those leverage ratios look dangerous. Your cash flow structure appears unstable, and from what I can see, you're carrying more debt than your asset base can reasonably support." The silence in the diner was now complete. Harrison Blackwell stared at me like I'd started speaking ancient Greek. "I'm sorry," Harrison said, his voice dripping with condescension, "but I don't recall asking for financial advice from the waitress." The words hit the diner like a slap. A few customers chuckled, the uncomfortable kind of laughter that happens when someone with power humiliates someone without it. Tommy's face went red, but he didn't intervene. Not for a waitress challenging a customer who probably spent more on lunch than Murphy's made in a week. I felt the familiar burn of shame creeping up my neck, the same feeling I'd had during every news interview, every courtroom appearance, every moment when people looked at me like I was some kind of con artist instead of the victim of one. But then I looked down at those papers again, at the patterns that didn't lie, even when everything else did. "You're right," I said, my voice steady as winter. "You didn't ask, but if you had, I'd tell you to get a full audit of your financial structure before it's too late. What I can see from here suggests you're heading for serious trouble." Harrison's laugh was sharp and mirthless. "Is that so? And what exactly qualifies you to make such bold predictions about my business?" "Experience," I said simply. "I've seen enough balance sheets to recognize the warning signs, even from scattered documents on a diner table." The color started to drain from his face. "That's quite enough," he said, standing abruptly and gathering his papers. "I don't know where you think you learned to read financial statements, but—" "Catherine Wells," I said, quietly. He froze. "Wells and Associates Financial Consulting. I managed portfolios for 30 years before my son destroyed my company. I've seen more financial disasters than you've had board meetings, and yours has all the classic warning signs." Harrison stared at me for a long moment, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been fear. "Impossible," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'd need to see your full financials to be certain," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee with hands that weren't shaking anymore. "But if you want a professional opinion, I'll be here tomorrow." He left without paying for his eggs Benedict. The next morning came gray and drizzling, typical Chicago spring weather that couldn't decide if it wanted to be depressing or just consistently annoying. I was opening Murphy's at 6 a.m., same as every Thursday, when I heard the knock on the glass door. Harrison Blackwell stood outside in the rain, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. His designer suit was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and he was clutching a manila folder against his chest like it contained the secrets of the universe. I unlocked the door, noting that his Italian leather shoes were soaked through. "We're not open for another hour," I said. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice hoarse, "about what you said yesterday." I stepped aside to let him in, flipping on the lights and starting the coffee machine out of habit. The diner felt different at this hour, quieter, more honest somehow. Like secrets were easier to tell before the rest of the world woke up. "Coffee?" I asked. He nodded, sliding into the same booth he'd occupied yesterday. His hands were shaking slightly as he opened the folder and spread papers across the table. "I spent all night going through my books," he said. "Had my accountant prepare summary reports, pulled records going back 2 years. I poured his coffee, noting the dark circles under his eyes. "And? You were right." The words came out like he was confessing to murder. "About the warning signs, the leverage problems, all of it. My accountant says we have maybe 4 months before the creditors start circling." I sat down across from him, curious despite myself. In my old life, clients came to me before they reached the cliff edge, not after they'd already started falling. "How did you see it so quickly?" he asked. "My own financial team didn't catch what you spotted in 20 minutes. Your financial team gets paid to tell you what you want to hear," I said, sipping my coffee. "I don't." Harrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. Brutal honesty from the woman I insulted in front of a room full of strangers. "There's some irony for you." "There usually is." He leaned forward, his pale blue eyes intense. "I need your help, Catherine. I don't know what that looks like or what it costs, but I need someone who can see through the bullshit and tell me if there's a way out of this mess." "I'm a waitress," I reminded him. "You're Catherine Wells," he said, "and despite everything that happened, you were one of the best financial minds in Chicago before your son destroyed your company." I felt something stir in my chest, a feeling I hadn't experienced in 2 years. Professional pride, maybe? Or just the simple pleasure of being recognized for something other than my son's crimes. "What exactly are you asking me?" "I'm asking you to save my company." "Save your company?" I repeated, making sure I'd heard him correctly. "Mr. Blackwell, I serve coffee and take orders for eggs. I haven't touched a financial consulting project in 2 years, and when I did, it ended with FBI raids and criminal investigations. Because your son was a thief," Harrison said bluntly. "Not because you were incompetent." The words hung in the air between us. It was the first time in 2 years that anyone had made that distinction without being paid to represent me legally. "Besides," he continued, "what do you have to lose? You're working at a diner in a neighborhood where the sirens play lullabies. I'm offering you a chance to do what you were born to do. And if I can't fix it? If your company collapses anyway?" Harrison shrugged. "Then at least I'll go down knowing I tried everything, including swallowing my pride and asking a waitress for help." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception or desperation. Both were there, but underneath was something else. Respect, maybe, or just the recognition that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. "I'd need to do this legally," I said slowly. "I maintained my Series 66 license and kept my LLC active. Old habits. Never thought I'd need them again." "You still have your credentials?" Financial advising was my life for 30 years. Even after everything collapsed, I couldn't quite let go completely. Harrison's expression shifted to something approaching relief. "Then we can do this properly." "I'd need complete access," I continued. "Every bank statement, every loan document, every contract and agreement. No secrets, no off-limits files. Done. I'd need authority to make recommendations. If I say restructure something, you consider it seriously. If I say liquidate an asset, you evaluate it." "Understood. And I'd need my old consulting rate," I said, naming a figure that made his eyebrows rise. "Plus equity if we turn this around. If I save your company, I own part of it." Harrison was quiet for a long moment, calculating risks and rewards with the desperation of a drowning man being offered a life preserver that might be made of concrete. "Agreed," he said finally. "But I have one condition, which is, we position this as bringing in independent strategic consulting, professional turnaround expertise. My board doesn't need to know you've been working at Murphy's." I almost laughed. From senior partner to waitress to independent consultant. At least this trajectory was pointing upward again. "Ashamed to admit you found your consultant in a diner. Ashamed to admit I need outside help at all," he corrected. "My business reputation is hanging by a thread." Fair enough. In the corporate world, admitting weakness was like chumming shark-infested waters. "When do we start?" I asked. "How about now?" Harrison pulled out his phone and dialed. "James? It's Harrison. I need you to prepare a complete financial package for Wells Strategic Consulting. Everything. Yes, everything. Have it ready by noon. He hung up and looked at me with something approaching hope. "Welcome back to the game, Catherine Wells." I refilled his coffee cup, my hands steady for the first time in months. Let's see if I remember how to play. Harrison's office occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Blackwell Tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Lake Michigan that probably cost more per square foot than most people's houses. When his assistant, James, handed me the comprehensive financial files, I felt like an archaeologist discovering a lost civilization. "Mr. Blackwell is in meetings until 3, James said, his tone suggesting that independent consultants who used to be waitresses ranked somewhere below office furniture in his hierarchy of respect. "Perfect," I said, settling into the conference room with my coffee. I work better without an audience. 3 hours later, I understood why Harrison looked like a man facing his own execution. Blackwell Enterprises wasn't just bleeding money. It was hemorrhaging like a trauma patient in an emergency room. The Miami real estate project alone was a financial catastrophe that made the Titanic look like a minor navigation error. But buried in the chaos, I found something interesting. A pattern of investments that didn't quite fit the rest of Harrison's portfolio. Tech startups, biomedical research, clean energy projects, all showing modest but steady returns while his flashier ventures crumbled. When Harrison returned from his meetings, he found me reorganizing his entire financial structure on the whiteboard like I was planning a military campaign. "How bad is it?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Worse than you thought," I said, capping my marker, "but not as hopeless as it looks." I walked him through the analysis, explaining how his ego had led him to chase high-profile deals while ignoring the solid, unsexy investments that were actually making money. His face grew paler with each revelation. "So what you're telling me," he said slowly, "is that I'm an idiot. I'm telling you that you're a successful businessman who started believing his own press releases," I corrected. "There's a difference, though the end result is remarkably similar." Harrison laughed despite himself. "Brutal honesty strikes again. You wanted someone who wouldn't blow sunshine up your assets," I reminded him. "I'm delivering as advertised." Over the next week, I developed a rescue plan that was surgical in its precision. Sell the Miami disaster to cut losses, liquidate 3 underperforming subsidiaries, and double down on the quiet winners that nobody was paying attention to. It would mean swallowing Harrison's pride and admitting failure publicly, but it would save the company. "The board will want detailed justification," Harrison said when I presented the proposal. "These are projects I've been promoting for 2 years. Then we'll give them detailed justification," I said. "Professional analysis, market data, the works. This isn't about pride anymore. Harrison, it's about survival." The first test came during a board meeting on a rainy Thursday. I sat at the conference table as Wells Strategic Consulting, officially presenting the turnaround strategy to 11 skeptical faces. "This is madness," declared Marcus Webb, the board chairman who'd been questioning Harrison's leadership for months. "You're proposing we abandon our most high-profile investments." "I'm proposing we abandon our most expensive mistakes," I replied, my voice steady and professional. "The data supports strategic divestiture of underperforming assets and reallocation to profitable sectors." I walked them through the numbers, showing how the Miami project was hemorrhaging cash with no realistic path to profitability, while the overlooked tech investments were generating consistent returns. The vote was close, 5 in favor, 4 against, with 2 abstentions. But it passed. As the board members filed out, Webb approached Harrison with the expression of a man who smelled blood in the water. "Bringing in outside consultants reeks of desperation, Harrison," he said quietly. "The investors are asking questions. How long before they lose confidence entirely?" "As long as it takes to turn this company around," Harrison replied. After Webb left, Harrison slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. "He's planning something," I observed. "I know.